Hello, this is Indicus. Today we're going to talk about the Mauryan Empire. The Mauryan Empire is the first major empire to unite all of South Asia under a centralized state. It is an important empire to India's history and development of its people. It lasted from 322 BCE to 184 BC. This video shows us an overview of this important empire. The early days of the Mauryan Empire. This dynasty is said to be founded by Chandragupta Maurya. Its origins are varied from Buddhist, Jain, and Hindu sources. Buddhist sources state that he is a Kshatriya from the Maurya clan. Jain sources state that he is a Brahmin, while Hindu sources vary from being the son of the Nanda king to a Sudra. Chanakya, also known as Kautilya, adopted and trained him. The previous dynasty of Magadha, the Nandas, were unpopular, though how unpopular they were in reality is debatable, since most sources we have are from the long after the Nanda period. Details about the conquest of the Nanda Empire is mostly lost, and a few sources remaining often vary. One of these states that he captured Pataliputra easily after revolting, while the play Muduru Rakshasa mentioned that he started at Punjab and then captured Pataliputra. He then turned westward and fought a war against the Seleucids and won. The details about this campaign is lost too, but the terms of peace are known to us. The Seleucid Basileus, Seleucus first Nicator, gave up the satrapies of Arcosia, Gedrosia, Arya, and Paropinasa in exchange for 500 war elephants. He then initiated reforms and infrastructure projects like the Uttaparta Road. He then abdicated and became a Jain monk. His son Bindusara succeeded Chandragupta and then consolidated the empire. It is debated whether Sara or his son Ashoka expanded the empire to the Deccan. Ashoka. Ashoka is a son of Bindusara. He is not the intended heir to the throne. When and how did he convert to Buddhism is widely debated. Whether he converted to Buddhism due to his marriage with Devi before his coronation or after his campaign at Kalinga is also debated by historians. After Bindusara's death, Ashoka then took over the capital and killed his brothers. He then became a king at around 273 BCE and then became a tyrant, executing ministers and concubines. He vassalized the Tamuk kingdoms and tribes in East and South Asia. His conquest of Kalinga, what is now Odisha, led to him being less violent, and he built edicts to spread his message of Dharma in Sanskrit. He sent Buddhist missionaries to the Hellenistic world, i.e., the Diadochi states, to promote Buddhism. He also sent his son to convert the Sri Lankan king to Buddhism, which led to the introduction and spread of Buddhism in Sri Lanka. According to Ashokavardhana, he persecuted Adviks and Jains. Historians question these along with his brutality in his pre-Kalinga era as exaggerations and fabrications to make his conversion to Buddhism to be more significant, as well as Jain sources not mentioning the alleged atrocities. But this also suggests he is less benevolent than he portrayed himself in his inscriptions. He maintained friendly relations with the Hellenistic world. Ashoka followed principles called Dhamma. He cared about the morals of his people and tried to improve their morals with his edicts. His principles include non-violence and universal brotherhood amongst all people groups in his empire. His principles also include abstinences and thus abolish many public rituals which involve sacrifices as well as replacing world hunts and pleasure trips with pilgrimages to Buddha sites. He granted protection to animals which are not used by humans, as well as introduced restrictions on injuring animals. He preached his message in his edicts. He did not abolish capital punishment for practical reasons. His effective policies, Dhamma, and administration kept the empire together. Administrating a vast empire from Balochistan to the Deccan is not easy. The Mauryan state solves this by decentralizing their empire. The Mauryan state is headed by the king and had legislative, judicial, and military powers along with executive functions. The empire was divided into numerous provinces, and the provinces are governed by viceroys and governors, with the exception of the central and eastern provinces, which are under the direct rule of the king, and some of the provinces like the Borjas and the Andhras are completely autonomous. The king was aided and advised by a council. This council was said to be small in number but was very influential and appointed many major officials from governors, viceroys, military heads of departments, and so on. The state also employed spies who reported to the king about matters related to the capital and yard. A typical Mauryan city is administered by 6 committees with 5 members in each committee. The first committee manages industrial arts. The second committee manages foreigners in the city. The third committee manages birth and deaths. The fourth committee manages trade and commerce. The fifth committee manages manufactured goods, and the sixth committee collects taxes on manufactured goods. The districts are administered by officers who manage various functions of the district from agriculture, forest, timber, metal foundries, and so on. Ashoka introduces changes to the administration. The king is now assisted by his deputy, crown prince, and his chief minister, along with his council. The provincial governors and viceroy are also assisted by a council and by 3 more officials called Rajaka, Yuta, and Mahamata. The Rajaka job is to appoint officials, manage the districts, and to assign rewards and punishments. The Utah's job is to manage the district's money, and the Mahamata's job is to head various departments from religious inquisitions, matters related to womanhood, managing cities, and so on. The empire's diplomacy are managed by ambassadors who go abroad. The king also employed officers whose job is to live among the people and report about their condition. There is also an officer called Viraja Bhumika whose job is to manage public utilities from water supplies to parks. The Mauryan state also handled relations with autonomous provinces with conciliatory but strict methods. Ashoka also introduces the practice of Anusamyana, em- events who served as inspection of officials as well as propaganda. Thus, the Mauryan state is governed by a vast bureaucracy with many officials. Society. The Mauryan society was an agrarian society, just like the rest of the Iron Age world. Mauryan society was divided into 4 castes of the Varna system. Unlike later eras, however, the Mauryan caste system was fluid, and the positions of the different Varnas changed, but the Mauryan eras also when the caste system was beginning to solve, i.e., some privileges are only available to some castes, and yada yada yada. The Mon king normally owned all the land in the kingdoms, but the lands in practice were owned by Gahapatis, also served as merchants, tax collectors, and financiers. The Mon officials assessed villages based on the amount of revenue and classified into low, middle, and high quality. The villages were classified into the following categories: tax exempt villages, Parashadaka, those that supplied soldiers, Ayodhya, those that provided grain, gold, and cattle, Hirayana, provided raw materials, Kupya, and those that provided labor, Ershti. The tax rate from the farmers and the herdsmen are usually at a quarter% of the income. The Moorish state regulated and supervised all trades of any merchandise, and fraud was strictly punished. The Moorish state collected a trade tax from foreign merchandise of 1% of 1/50% of the state toll dues, and the toll dues themselves are priced at 1/5 of the price of the merchant taxed. The toll taxes are also reduced or exempted when cargo was damaged from the voyage. The Moorian state also collected roughly 5% for domestic items and 10% for foreign items of a merchant's profit from his sales. For the general tax, the state usually collected 1/10% through the tax rate varied based on different items. Moorian herdsmen reared cows, buffaloes, goats, sheep, camel, horses, elephants, and donkeys. Fishes are usually prohibited on certain days from being caught and sold by the Mauryan state, but it is allowed during most of the year. Mauryan farmers grew rice, wheat, and lentils. Mauryan society had guilds consisted of specific workers from a specific village. These guilds are prohibited to move to other villages unless without official permission. These guilds control almost all of the production of manufactured items and thus had more demand than their labor could output, so they hired new laborers and slaves. Guild members had special protection due to their influence, were paid in wages based on the quality of their work. More soldiers formed cooperatives, and these cooperatives served as an unofficial reserve tool for the state. More miners and quarry workers produced both useful and precious metals as well as stones and gems. Morians carved wood, ivory, stone, and bone, and they made textiles out of wood, cotton, dukula, a soft and white-colored textile, and kisutra, a type of linen. Morians used earthenware pottery for the lower classes and back polished pottery for the upper classes. The Mauryan Empire is home to a variety of languages. Prakrit languages like Sorasini and Magadhi Prakrits are the most common languages in the empire and are the languages of administration and the edicts, while Sanskrit is used as a liturgical and literary language. The Pali and Paicali were also used as liturgical and literary languages. Dravidian languages like Old Tamil and Old Telugu were spoken in the south, with the exception of Sri Lanka, which used an Indo-Aryan language, Indo-Prakrit. Iranian languages like Early Middle Persian and Bactrian were spoken in the northwest, with Aramaic and Greek serving as the literary language and a lingua franca for that region. Writing was first reintroduced during this period after 1,000 years of illiteracy, which is due to the collapse of the Indus Valley people and their script. The most common script used during the Mauryan Empire is the Brahmi script, the common ancestor of most South Asian and Southeast Asian scripts. Kharosthi is a sister script of the Brahmi used in Gandhara, while Aramaic and Greek scripts are used in the northwest regions. The origins of the Brahmi script is debated. The most popular theory is that the script derives from Aramaic. To an indigenous audience is also possible. Kharosthi is definitely derived from Aramaic. The Mauryan Empire is home to a vast road system, with most important road being the Grand Trunk Road. The Mauryan society certainly traded both by land and sea and exchanged ideas with the Hellenistic, the Iraqi state of Persia, Mesopotamia, Egypt, and so on, and the state maintained friendly relations with these states. The Mauryans exported blankets, animal skins, horses, diamonds, conch shells, gems, spices, peacocks, parrots, ivy, carvings, and cotton clothing, and imported red coral, horses, and glass. The Morne state had monopoly on the large shipbuilding industry and put officers in charge of any ship from the empire. The Mormons practiced a wide variety of religions from Buddhism, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, Dravidian folk religions, Hellenism with its cults, Advikas, Charvakas, and so on, and had a diverse and vast philosophical scene comparable to the hundred schools of thought in China or the Hellenic world. Many of these religions and philosophies competed for state patronage. Some of them succeeded, like Buddhism, while others failed, like Advikas. Thus, the Mormon society is big, complex, and diverse. Architecture. Not a lot of Moorish architecture survived due to it being mostly made out of wood and centuries of invasion and war afterwards. But according to Baha'i, Muslims, and English travelers, and a few surviving examples that we have, like the pillars containing the edicts and the cases Barabar and Narjuni, shows the quality of Moorish artisans and craftsmen. Faxian, also known as Baha'i, described the palace of Ashoka, which didn't survive, as a place built by gods and not men. The Indian historian Radha Mukherjee in the book The History and the Culture of the Indian People, edited by R.C. Majmunda and sponsored by K.M. Munshi, described the case of Barabar and Narjuni hills as shining like mirrors, while English travelers like John Marshall and Bishop Hebel placed the pillars containing the edicts of Ashoka as fine pieces of Sicily, adorning and incredibly lustrous despite its age. In the South Indian Muslim chronicle, the Tariq-e-Firishta praised the chiseling and the fabrication of the pillar, and even the Sultan of the Delhi Sultanate removed the pillar to be erected next to the Juma Mosque due to the exquisite quality of the pillars. Ashoka is said to have erected 84,000 stupas. The number is likely exaggerated but shows the prolific building projects during the Mauryan Empire. The Mauryan also built reservoirs and other irrigation projects, the most famous being the reservoir at Sundarana, which was near Junagadh. Thus, the Mauryan period is home to exquisite architecture. Decline. The Mauryan Empire declined soon after the death of Ashoka at 232 BC and ended 50 years later with the accession of Pushmayetta Mitra Shunga and the accession of the last emperor, Vidahadaratha. The southern parts, what is now modern-day Karnataka, Telangana, and Andhra Pradesh of the Mauryan Empire, declared independence and became the Satavahanas, while the Kalinga left to become the Mahamegavahanas. The western regions, what is now Maharashtra and Gujarat, declared independence and became the Virabha kingdom, and the northwestern frontier spread off from the empire under Subhaga Sena. The Greek invasions weakened the empire even further, and the dynasty was finally replaced by Pushya-Mitra Shunga and the assassination of the last emperor. The causes of the decline are various, from local autonomy, difficulty of communication with the frontier provinces, general oppression and brutality, palace intrigues, factionalism, and treachery by officials. Foreign invasions may have accelerated the decline further with the worsening conditions. There are evidence of these conditions with the city of Taxila revolting many times, likely due to general oppression, and Kalinga edicts by Soka tried to vainly stop the oppression of his region by his officials. Thus, the empire fell and new empire took its place, and the reasons for declining are various. Conclusion. The Mauryan Empire did not last long, but its legacy is long lasting, from connecting India to the outside world the spread of Buddhism to the first ever unification attempt in the history of South Asia, and many more. Thank you for watching. Here are my sources. Goodbye.